Hi again. A.T. Robertson, The Divinity of Christ in the Gospel of John. He's entering chapter 12 of the Gospel. This chapter in its entirety, covering from chapters 12 to 17, is entitled The Secret of Jesus. And he starts it with a famous quote of Jesus himself from chapter 14. He that hath seen me hath seen the Father. This section of the Gospel is often called the heart of Jesus. Indeed, Sears termed the fourth Gospel the heart of Christ. These chapters are the most familiar parts of the book and present the sympathetic side of Christ's nature, quite in contrast to the militant note in chapters 5 to 10, but quite in the strain of chapter 11, that is, the raising of Lazarus. Painters of Christ have taken their cue almost entirely from John 12 to 17, to the neglect of the masterful element of struggle so prominent in the earlier chapters of John and in the Synoptic Gospels. Both aspects of his character are true, but Jesus is both the suffering Messiah and Christus Victor, that is, Christ conquering. The circumstances that surround Jesus are the most affecting imaginable. He has run his race nearly to the goal. He knows what the outcome will be. He shrinks from the awful catastrophe and yet is sure of triumph. Meanwhile, he must make one more effort to prepare the disciples for the gloom of his death, all the more that one of them is to betray him. So here we have Christus Consolator, Christ the Comforter. He is trying to give the faith that looks through death for the heartening of the 11 faithful men who go with him down to the valley of the shadow of death. Then the subhead is the feast in Christ's honor at Bethany. The Gospels of Mark and Matthew record this feast at Bethany on Tuesday evening, Roman time, just 2 days before the Passover, while John apparently, in 12 verse 1, locates it 6 days before the Passover. It is possible, of course, that John may simply mention the feast in connection with the statement of Christ's arrival at Bethany, since he does not again recur to Bethany in his narrative, and so out of chronological order. John does not state that it was at the house of Simon the leper, but simply has they, but notes that Martha, Mary, and Lazarus were there. For the purpose of our discussion, the point of importance is his justification of Mary's beautiful act of high sentiment against the selfish criticism of Judas, who rallied all the apostles to his view. Suffer her to keep it against the day of my burying, 12:7 says. Matthew and Mark explain more clearly that Jesus meant that the act of Mary was a preparation for his burial. She alone had come to understand the repeated predictions of Jesus about his death reported in the Synoptic Gospels, especially during the last 6 months. She probably did not understand what he meant by resurrection, but with a woman's delicate insight, Mary of Bethany had caught to some extent the point of view of Jesus, and she showed her love and sympathy before the burial. The shadow of the cross was thus at this feast of gratitude, but the devil himself entered afresh into the heart of Judas, and sent him in a resentful rage to the Sanhedrin, who were in despair how to accomplish the death of Jesus. So while Mary's heart was full of tender sympathy with Christ about his death, Judas, with murderous treachery, was plotting to hasten that death. Then he has a subhead covering just 3 verses, that is 9 to 11. We must probably, the subhead, the curiosity of the crowd. We must probably go back in imagination to the Friday afternoon and the Sabbath before the Passover, when Jesus is at Bethany, having come on up from Jericho. The common people from the city and from a distance learned that Jesus was there, and they went out to see Jesus and to see Lazarus, who had been raised from the dead. One can easily imagine the excitement that this combination created. The raising of Lazarus had led the Sanhedrin by formal vote to decide to put Jesus to death before his arrest or trial. That according to John 11, verse 53. Now they have decided to put Lazarus to death also, and for the same reason that because of him, many of the Jews went and believed on Jesus, according to 12:10 in the subsequent verses. Now all other public questions sank out of sight, The one goal before the Sanhedrin was to put Jesus out of the way, and all others, if necessary, who clung to him. Next time, the Messianic demonstration. I'll put in a link to one of the few videos we did on Mary and Martha, that little segment, 5 verses in the Gospel of Luke. What did Christ mean when he said about Mary, in talking in mild reproof to Martha, that Mary had chosen the good portion? See you next time.